So I like to call this the cycle of doom. I think we've all experienced the cycle of doom when you are looking for a job, like the stat I said before about how 30% of jobs require experience. And you can't get experience without a job, and then you can't get a job without experience. And then you're just trapped in this constant cycle where you're getting rejected and rejected, and then you're applying and getting rejected. And then the worst case happens, or the best case, you get an interview. You're so excited, you're panicked because it's been 6 months of applying to jobs. And then you get there and you blow it because you don't feel confident about yourself. And then you don't get the job, and then it starts over. I had this happen a lot. It's terrible and stressful. And I have been given a lot of feedback that I do need to improve my confidence and then I do need to like put my best foot forward in an interview. And it was something where I honestly just thought to myself, how can I possibly be expected to do that based off of everything that's going on in the job search process? How could any person expect me to feel confident when all I'm getting is just rejections and being shot down? Tam, you can go to the next slide. So the good news is confidence isn't a personality trait, it's a skill. So you aren't doomed, you just haven't had enough practice. And the thing that I think the most about with confidence is no one really knows whether you're confident or not. No one can say, okay, I'm speaking to this person, I'm 100% like sure that they're sure of themselves because it's all just how they come across. And this is something that I've learned is it really is a fake it till you make it kind of situation. You're not going to be confident until you try. And no one knows whether that's real or not. You can go to the next slide, Tam. So yes, that's the final slide. But basically, what I'm trying to say is I don't think that confidence is something that you just gain overnight. It's not something that's easily acquired. And it's something that I think we have a very big misconception of because we look at different people who might seem like the most confident person in the world, and really that person has been rejected from 5 jobs that day. But at the end of the day, there's not really any wrong way to go about it, and there's no way to be able to learn how to be confident until you just do it. I know that since I've joined Pollen, I've gained a lot of experience and felt a lot more confident, but I also still spend every day thinking about how did I end up here? I don't really know if I'm in the right place. I don't really know if I deserve to be here. I'm struggling with myself as well, but I've just put myself in situations that have been traditionally out of my comfort zone and realized, okay, what's actually realistically the worst thing that can happen? That thing never happens. And I walk away being like amped up and excited and feeling like I've felt so much better. And it's so daunting, but the hardest part is just the hurdle. So once you are able to push yourself over that and realize that confidence isn't real, none of this is real. All of this is just something that you are creating in your head, and no one cares as much about how you are behaving than you do. Once you jump over that hurdle, then you'll feel so much better. And this, again, aligns with what Tam's about to talk about, which is imposter syndrome. Everyone, I think 82% of people in our generation experience imposter syndrome in their jobs. And yet people have gotten there, and you would never expect that the person next is experiencing that. So I think that that's a good transition for Tam to kind of talk about how, even though people might be seeming like they're successful, how they still need to overcome imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's a lovely segue. Thank you, Caden. So I'm going to focus a bit on imposter syndrome, where I feel like that's kind of a Venn diagram with confidence in general. But I kind of wanted to use myself as an example. So when I joined Pollen, I was 23 and it was my first big girl job. And I think for me, because I didn't know what to expect, I didn't go in with any kind of strategy. It was just like, let's just go for it. Let's just, I don't know, see how it goes or whatever. And I had always heard of imposter syndrome, but I don't think I actually experienced it before starting this role, or I didn't think I'd experienced it. And I'll get onto that in a second because I think what people don't realize is that imposter syndrome affects all parts of the job search, not just once you're in a role or once you're in education. It starts from actually looking at job descriptions and stuff like that. I'm going to get into that in a second. So imposter syndrome is a psychological experience in which a person suffers from feelings of intellectual and or professional fraudulence. So long story short, just feeling unworthy, feeling as if you don't belong in a space. Yeah. So the facts. So yeah, 82% of people experience it at some point in their careers. 75% of women executives across industries have experienced imposter syndrome. And women, so essentially, women are way more likely to experience imposter syndrome because it's like how we've been socialized. But this increases with women of color, Black women, as well as members of the LGBTQ community. So I kind of wanted to make this clear because I think when we speak about imposter syndrome, we see it as quite an internal thing. And actually, what I've come to learn is that imposter syndrome is as a result of our society and is actually quite systemic. And so while the overall kind of advice I'm going to give is about reframing, I think it's really important to acknowledge that imposter syndrome doesn't just come out of anywhere. And once we understand the actual foundations of it, it's easier to acknowledge why you experience it and then move forward from that point. So yeah, imposter syndrome means that when we look at job descriptions, especially as a woman, you would feel less likely to apply for it if you don't think that you fit all of the job requirements. And so my advice is, especially when you're entry level and it's asking for like the world and beyond, I would almost ignore that and go in with this sense of, do you know what? I see that a lot of it is based off of writing. I know how to write. I'm going to apply for this anyway. And if I don't get it, okay, like it was an experience. And I think as well that when it comes to this sort of thing, transferable skills are really important. And if you know how to use that as evidence in a job application, that will take you quite far as well. Um, and then again, I just wanted to say from our perspective as well, like if even if you don't meet all of the requirements, there is something to be said about someone who is really enthusiastic about the role, about the company, that come forth with like a really, I don't know, like they're just really excited about the chance to work there. And I feel like as much as the job application process feels like a slug, you are interacting with humans and humans often go off of energy and stuff like that. If you are enthusiastic about a role and that comes forth, oftentimes employers can be swayed by that. And I've said this, and the team have known this for like employers will create roles for people, even if they didn't like necessarily think that's who they would go for based off of skills. Once they get in front of you and actually see who you are, they're more likely to give you a shot. So fear of rejection. I actually can't see because of the bar. Just give me 1 second. Yep. So comes from our basic human need to be accepted or to belong. So again, I think we can look at a fear of rejection as something that's like, oh my gosh, I hate that I feel this way because it can often make you stuck in that cycle of fear. I think, Caden, you touched on this in your one. But it's important to understand that this is a very human response. And I think another thing to keep into account is that we are navigating a job application process or the traditional one outside of like what we do here at Pollen, which has failed. It's set up so that in a way that makes it very hard for people to succeed. And so if you are constantly facing rejection, it is probable that you will internalize that rejection at some point or the other. And yeah, I just think it's important to note that this will has and will probably affect your job application process because you will often come to points where you're like, well, what is even the point? Yeah. And then this affects your behavior during interviews. So what often happens is that because of this imposter syndrome or fear of rejection, you're either over explaining during interviews, which means that as from an interviewer perspective, we don't really, it's hard to point out the main, how do I articulate it? if you're over explaining because you're really desperate to showcase everything that you have and all your experience and everything, it makes it hard for us to pick out the relevant points, and can actually take away from the interview. And then you can have the exact opposite where you're just not saying much and it's very one word answers because you're caught up in nerves. And so for me, I thought I'd only experienced imposter syndrome once I got a role. But actually tracking back, there have been interview processes where I've like chewed their ear off about a module I did, like, I don't know, in my degree, or there have been others where it's been very one-worded responses. And with both of those situations, I didn't get the role. So again, just um for me, again, that came with practice, just knowing how to navigate an interview. I know it sounds very cliche, but before going into one, actually just practicing with anyone. It doesn't need to be someone who knows how to do interviews. I think just the sole action of practicing your answers will do the world for you in terms of the actual interview. And my main one, as someone who gets very nervous, is to treat interviews as conversations. And I think once you do that, it relaxes the situation, but B, it allows you to reframe your mindset when it comes to approaching interviews. Because we always go into it thinking, oh yeah, well, I need them to see the best of me. But you also need to understand that with an interview, you need to be understanding the company as well. And I think that's really important because when you're really caught up in wanting a job, you start to feel like I will take anything. And actually, sometimes the worst is to get a job and to be in it and realize, oh my God, I actually hate this. I hate what I'm doing. I hate the company or whatever. And perhaps if you had taken more time during that interview process to not just show yourself off, but take into account the company and where you're working for, that could have been prevented. And then, yeah, just showing keen enthusiasm for a company. So if you're going into an interview feeling as if you're not worthy for the role because you don't have 5 years of experience or whatever, sometimes just, as I said before, when I said enthusiasm and energy, just go on the company website. Like that is, if you take anything from this, please just go on a company website and take in some information of the history, or like, I don't know, find someone on LinkedIn that works there. If you know who's going to be interviewing you, go on their LinkedIn and find out some information on them and bring it up in the interview. Like that sort of energy and enthusiasm does wonders for an interview more than any skills or experience that you, I mean, skills and experience may matter in some roles, but for the most part, if you're showing enthusiasm, that sets you apart. Um, yeah, so doubting abilities and qualifications. So once again, we exist in a flawed system, and that will impact your confidence levels. But it's important to remember that everyone has abilities and skills, even if you've never had a job before. One of the key things that I took away when I was mentored before I got this role is that because I had no relevant experience in what it is that I wanted to do, it's literally just thinking about personality traits. What traits of yours would work well for the job that you're looking for? Is it that you're perceptive? Is it that you're very, I don't know, enthusiastic and friendly, or just if you even take time to note that down and see how that transfers to the job description, again, it's evidence that you can do a role even if you don't have the relevant experience. Um, okay, so a year on. So I just want to make it clear, as much as I'm speaking on this, I still do experience imposter syndrome at some points or another. I think that's natural. It doesn't just disappear. But acknowledging why I feel it, i.e., understanding the society that I'm in and the background of imposter syndrome has helped. And I think what's really important as well, for me anyway, is as much as I acknowledge that I experience imposter syndrome, as will many of the other attendees here will also, it's making sure that you know the strategies to kind of move past that, or else you sit in imposter syndrome, sorry, and do nothing about it. So for me, when I was experiencing it at its highest, it meant that my confidence levels dropped and then I wasn't performing in the way that I felt that I could. And then it's like, am I just going to sit there and then just not, like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Just understanding those steps and strategies that you can take. For me, it was like affirmations. So I am qualified and deserving of the opportunity that is in front of me, and so is everyone here. So yeah, that's my that's my section done.
Thanks, Tam. Kind of go on to my thing. I started it in a way that why are we qualified to talk about this? Which kind of leads on quite nicely. So I think what a lot of people don't realize within the community is that us three were all hired the Pollen way. So we were all a part of the community, and we are a small team. So there's now five of us within the Pollen team. So everything that happens in Pollen is done within such a small team. And what happened is we all were job seekers who joined Pollen for a better experience and because we were struggling to look for a job. I think both the girls have touched on what their experiences were. But this is why we are kind of here to talk about hiring and what it kind of looks like and give those practical tips because I think I got like a email at the end of the year for my Calendly Wrapped and it said like I had 400 meetings this year. So we've spoken to a lot of people from the community and we were a part of the community. So not only do we know what it's like to look for a job, but we've also spoken to so many different people and we've been in a room for so many different interviews. And as well, the reason that I'm kind of talking about the hiring side is that I've been in a lot of the conversations with the employers. So my kind of role is I join the employers when they come to us. They say, we've got a role, we'd love to talk to you. So I normally join that call with Sophie and we talk about what they're looking for, the kind of qualities they want and things like that. So we bring like a mixture of opinions and hopefully we're able to give you not only some guidance, but also some like practical tips that will help you in your job searching journey. But yeah, I just thought I'd say this is why we're talking about this. So the really interesting thing is what I've kind of mentioned is I graduated in 2023 and this was my first job. So I submitted my last essay, I want to say like end of March, April, and then I started Pollen in September. I had no idea that I was going to focus on the recruitment side. I joined as a marketing assistant. So I thought I would enjoy TikTok, LinkedIn, all of those things. I still do those things. But what I really enjoy is the hiring side. So I speak to so many different people, so many people in the community, and so many people in different companies. So from CEOs to hiring managers to anybody and everybody, really. And I've learned a lot of things by being here over the year and a half. And this is kind of what I know now that I didn't know back then. So we love a stat. So I thought I'd include some stats that we haven't heard enough already. But the first kind of point, what I'm going to do as well is just talk about some examples that I've come across that kind of prove that these stats are right. And hopefully you'll walk away from this with new ways to look for a job. So the first one is 80% of job openings are not publicly advertised. And when I kind of say that, I mean these are the roles that Tam kind of said that could be created, like they don't even exist yet. Or these are the kind of roles that a lot of companies, especially smaller ones, they can't afford to be posting jobs on job boards like Guardian Jobs or charity jobs. It's normally just on their LinkedIn or it's kind of internal. They're looking for different things. It's not out there, it's not public. So this is kind of another way to find jobs. And when I was looking for a job, I stuck to the usual platforms until I stumbled across Pollen. And it wasn't until then that I realized that there's other places I can go. You're not really given the career advice at university that gives you all of the options available to you. You're kind of directed to the classic jobs board and then you're giving somebody in like your career services and the last time they probably applied for the job was the one they're in now, probably like 10 years ago. So they don't know how it's changed. They don't know the fact that we're not really having in-person interviews anymore. Like it's changed. And like what Tam said, the system is flawed. So, with 80% of job openings not being publicly advertised, we have an example of this that I just thought of earlier. And we started to do a session where people could join us. It was like a weekly clinic, like we're doing now, like the Ask Us Anything sessions. And we had somebody join us. It was nearly a year ago now. And it was just us and this one person. She was the only person who joined. So we were just there giving out information, and she was really forthcoming. She was like, I want to get into finance, I want to do this. And it wasn't until then that we kind of, Sophie said, oh, actually, I know somebody who works in this company. I'll put you in contact with them. they can maybe become a mentor for you. And then they do that, and then they secured an internship, and now they're there full time. So it's because they put themselves out there and they joined our Ask Anything call that Sophie was able to direct her in the right way and be able to connect her with an opportunity. That opportunity might have not been there if it wasn't for the relationship she had with that mentor. So that's kind of an example of how it works. So we have a mentor directory that you obviously can go to for guidance and support, but you never know who they might put you in contact with and roles that might not even exist yet. Okay, my second one is one of my favorites to say, but one of the scariest to actually comprehend, is that hiring managers spend only 7 seconds reviewing a CV. Um, so during education, we're never really given advice on how to write CVs. We have like one little session. I'm not sure if everybody is the same. We had one session on how to write a CV. We might have got some CV advice. But this meant that we didn't have the guidance that we needed. I don't think they realized about all of these like ATS systems and things like that. So you're actually quite lucky if your CV reaches a person. So the one thing that I can say is I kind of use the same CV and then I'd maybe adjust the cover letter, like to make it a bit more personalized. But you do need to do that with your CV as well. And I did not know that. ATS systems, they look for keywords, they kind of match it to the job. So sometimes when you're submitting the same CV with the same skills, it might not actually correlate to the role you're applying for. So just make sure that you're doing a much more tailored and targeted approach. I had no idea that was a thing. To be honest, I thought majority of my CVs went to a person and they would read the whole thing and they would read it and think, oh yeah, this person's great. That doesn't happen, which is why we shifted away from CVs. Um, it's a flawed system, as kind of Tam said. And the last one is 65% of UK employers prioritise cultural fit over qualifications. So this kind of example comes from the fact that I have the onboarding call with the employers. And obviously what we're kind of aimed for is at entry level candidates, but they do always come with soft skills that aren't necessarily skills at all. They're always like, we just want somebody who's really interested in the company, that we want somebody who likes this, or they really enjoy data, they like looking at numbers. We had one recently that was like they just enjoy watching TV. And there's certain things there that enthusiasm and your like how you approach a role can be seen much more than what you maybe list on your CV. So it's kind of going back to what Tam said in the way that apply for the roles, even though the list is maybe you don't have those skills or experience yet, put that enthusiasm in there and put those transferable skills that you might have from part-time roles or even your time during education, and then they can see that cultural fit in the fact that you just will love your job and naturally you will be good at it because you love it and you'll be able to develop and things like that. So they're the three stats that I didn't know when I was kind of looking for a job, and now talking to both employers and the community that I do now. And now I thought I would go on for some practical tips. So this is mainly for the pollen application. So we kind of had a little chat yesterday of what tips would we want our community to know when applying for jobs. So although this is relevant to the pollen exclusive roles we have, it will also be relevant in any job you apply for. So the first one is accuracy and tailoring your job application. So 90% of cover letters are rejected due to lack of customization for the job post. So whenever you apply for a job, make sure that it's really targeted at what the job is. And it isn't just like a blanket term of an introduction. So you've had a look at it and you've been able to display what you think is relevant to that role. And also when you're applying for roles, make sure that you take a look at what the role is and you actually think that you'll like it and you'll enjoy it. Because otherwise you're going to put yourself through a whole process, start a job, be there for a month and not like it. So you need to be really targeted and tailored with your whole job approach in when you're applying for jobs. Not only the roles you're applying for, but how you apply to them. So making sure that you're being very clear on what you're picking for and you're focusing on quality rather than quantity, because I am so guilty of that. I did it before when I was applying for like 100 jobs. it wasn't until I got to the point where, like, I have to admit, I was just a little bit fed up and I was a little bit tired of constantly clicking and sending the same CV. And sometimes I'll just change one or two words of my cover letters. It wasn't until I took the approach that I started changing my CV and cover letter for nearly every role. And rather than 100 jobs, I was applying for 10 jobs. I did actually see the benefit of it. So be much more targeted and tailored with your job process. And the second one is the use of AI. So 53% of UK job seekers use AI to help them apply for jobs. So I'm not against AI. It's shaping the future. It's something that's gonna like take over the world in some sense, and hopefully in much more positive way in the kind of negative rhetoric that we're seeing right now. So we're not against people using AI. I can see that it can assist you and I can see that it support you. But the one thing it does do is it takes away the personality of your application. So when you're applying for roles, we see it all the time that we have people apply to roles and we see the same kind of answers, kind of like 4 times in a row. And the own like barely any differences for it. So the only difference is sometimes there's different keywords, but the structure, the things they're kind of pointing at are all the same. So what happens when you have 5 applications that are completely the same? Like who are you gonna talk to and who are you gonna progress to the next stage? It's just it kind of gets to the point where you're just looking for those people who really put their personality into it and stand out and also kind of sway away from it. So if you are using AI, I would really recommend reading over it, make sure that there is no grammatical like errors in the fact that you're using like Americanized language or anything like that, but also changing it in the way that it does show your personality a bit more. And it's you develop from it and you add more to it than what is given. But I would always just suggest with job applications to kind of stay away from it. AI is something that you're going to eventually use in your job or throughout your life. I know sometimes I might use it for an occasional TikTok caption, but when applying for jobs, it's such a big deal for you. We kind of have this saying that looking for a job is a bit like dating. Would you start talking to somebody that you're talking to online through AI? Probably not, because you wouldn't do that. So you're presenting yourself in a way that to make sure that you're a right fit for them. And also for the employer, if you're using AI, it's not you. So they might hire you thinking that you have all of these skills or all of these things that you're displaying, and in reality, it's just something that AI is giving you. So we don't disagree with the use of AI, but just use it responsibly and make that choice. And the last one, I think Tam kind of touched on, and it is one of the things that we'd want you to take away from this whole masterclass, is to just do a bit of research. Only 40% of candidates take the time to understand a company before applying. We've seen it before with Pollen roles that will do a role for a different company, and within the whole application, they've done the application based to if they were applying for pollen. So not only does it show that you haven't done research, but it's also like a bit sad to see because you've spent so much time doing an application and it's not for the right role. So not only are you researching a company before you do an interview, but also just read the job spec and just make sure that you are really focusing on what you're applying to and whether you'd enjoy the role. Because a lot of times you kind of look through it and you think, oh yeah, that does sound like a bit of me, and you do the application and you forget to touch on what you actually think is relevant or what you actually have transferable skills. So what I used to do is when I would be applying to jobs, I would have like a split screen. So I'd have one side the job spec and the other side like my Google Doc or anything to be able to adjust my CV or cover letter. So just make sure that you're constantly referring to the job spec and then you're inputting that into whatever you're submitting for the role. And then before you speak to the employer. So any interviews, I think Tam kind of touched on it. Just like research them, look them up. I really like doing that because you kind of like you see who's working there. You're like, would I actually enjoy it there? What kind of things do they do? What kind of benefits do they have? You wouldn't just apply for it without knowing any of that because at work, that's where you spend majority of your time. So why would you want to go into a role that you know nothing about? So it's all about just taking care and just being a bit more careful with your approach, I would say, when looking for a job. But yeah, they're my quick fire practical tips, but there's other tips that we have on the resource hub if you want to check that out as well. And my last one isn't a practical tip, but it's the biggest tip that I give anyone, and that's to trust your gut. So this is actually a screenshot between me and my mum. You can see a picture of me and my mum at the bottom. And I sent her this in June 2023. I applied for Pollen, I think it was like the 3rd of June. And this was a different job. So I got through to the final stages of this job. Um, it was really red flaggy, and they wanted to interview me on a Saturday. I went into it and it was like a breakup room, so I could see everyone else who was applying. They said it was a marketing role, that I wouldn't be able to be creative. It seemed a bit like a pyramid scheme, but the salary, the fact that it was a job seemed all right. So I was just going with it because I was like, a job is a job. And then it wasn't until I had the interview that I actually took a step back and I thought, you know what, I don't actually think I would like this job, even if I got it. Um, and I'm so glad that I trusted my gut and I pulled out of the process, because I would have went into that job and been in there for what, a couple of months. And I remember I was in a place where all of my friends around me were starting to get jobs, and I was like, oh, but I haven't. Like, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm the only person in that friendship group now that's in a job they actually like. And a lot of the people that I was looking at, they don't actually have a job now because they've left. So I know what it's like to feel like you're in such a desperate need. And I know everybody has different circumstances that makes them need to have a job. But I do really suggest just trusting your gut when it doesn't feel right, because at the end of the day, then you're going to go into a job market again and struggle when applying for jobs. So really just trust your gut. And when something isn't right, go with it. But yeah, that's kind of the end of it. I guess, Tam, we're going to open up to any questions, but if you, like I said, we have different resources and everything, if any of this information is helpful.
Thanks for that, Holly. Yeah, I just wanted to open up for any questions at all. We did have questions come in when you signed up, so if you have anything, please put it in the chat, or else we'll just go off with the ones we received before. In the meantime, I'll start with ones that we received through sign up. So someone asked, how can I handle tough interview questions without losing confidence?
I can touch on that because that was kind of my topic.
Yeah.
I think that it's very hard to go into an interview if your mindset is already that they're out to get you. I know that there's a lot of questions in interviews that kind of seem like they're trying to catch you out, like questions where it's like, what is your best weakness? Or something like that, where you feel like there's not really a right answer. But it kind of goes along with what Holly said. I think if you are just authentic to yourself and not answering to what you think that they want to hear, but thinking about like how you can best represent yourself, then that's the best way. There's a method called the STAR method. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's basically a acronym for situation, task, approach, and response. And then that's how you go into your interview. So to be able to represent a situation well, you want to say, like if someone asks you a question, for example, of like, when did you make a mistake at work and how did you fix it? You want to start with, okay, what was the situation that came up? Like what happened? And then what did I do to remedy that? And like what was my approach? And then how did that, like what was the result of that? So to be able to walk through an entire process and give like evidence as to how you behaved, it's not so much about thinking that there's one right answer. It's more about being confident in what your answer is. Like we approach a lot of our skills challenge questions with a very open-ended mindset. And as long as someone is able to effectively explain themselves and is confident in their responses without fearing that it's not what we were thinking, then we approach that with a much better mindset. So I think that, yeah, it's just about making sure that you're authentic to yourself rather than trying to position yourself into what you think they would want you to say.
In line with that, Holly, I think this would be a good question for you. What is the best approach to answer the tell me about yourself question that we have on our application?
this was actually a topic that I was really tempted to put in the what I know now that I didn't then. I remember when I was applying for jobs and I always got that question, and the first thing I did was just list out my CV.
Mhm.
I just sat there for 5 minutes and I was just listing out my CV. But obviously at Pollen we don't have your CVs, but in any other job they have it already. They already have it in front of them. They've already had a look at it. So just make sure that you kind of start it in like a way that's like who you are. So just a kind of a roundabout basis, bring that personality in there, and then just think of anything that you've done that is kind of relevant, and then go into why you think that that would be a good fit for the role that you're applying for. So for us, if you kind of talk about loads of transferable skills, then that's great. We can kind of see that. You could go, oh, so I'm Holly. I currently work for Pulling Careers. I used to do this and now I do this. And then you're kind of talking that's relevant to the job you're applying for. But if I just started talking about the fact that I used to do cashing up at my local gym, that's got nothing to do with what I'm doing at Pollen. So just again, making it super relevant and kind of going through a process. But for us, it's always so interesting when you put that personality forward. So you don't list out the conversations that you're having with people across like online platforms or things like that. You're actually listing out what they don't know about you already. They've already had a look at your CV. So making sure that's very evident and bringing that personality forward. And we kind of take note of that when we're doing that. So whenever we have to tell you about myself question, when somebody kind of like lists out what would be on their CV, we have a CV list approach. We always say, but what about you? So what hobbies do you have or anything like that? So it's really nice when people come into that conversation with that already there. But that's my kind of approach with it. And it kind of connects with the last question in the way that it is a conversation. The way that I kind of look at it is that the person interviewing you had to be interviewed for this role. So they're not here to catch you out. And if a question is difficult, you can just say, "Oh, good question. Let me have a think." That's always my favorite thing to kind of say. They're not there to catch you out. And tell me about yourself question is always the most daunting. And I remember having it like listed out on a bit of paper. You don't need to do that. Just kind of go in to talk about who you are and why you've applied for that role, but keep it short and sweet that you're not just kind of relaying your CV at people.
Um, there was also a question kind of related to that, in relation to imposter syndrome. And the question was literally, how do I know that I'm actually skilled? Um, I think for, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, this question makes me quite sad because I suppose everyone has skills. It doesn't need to be in relation to a job or to like your academic potential. Everyone has a skill of some sort, even if your skill is being able to know what color nails look best on your skin tone. Like that is a skill. Every skill that you can like create offshoots of different skills from it. And I think sometimes this is actually just sitting down and noting what do I enjoy doing and what do I like doing and what am I good at? Because from that, there are going to be skills that come off of that. So if I gave myself an example, I I like to read. And I mean everyone can read, so great, but my skill from there is probably I'm introspective, I'm analytical. I like you need like just sitting down and being able to have a reflect on what kind of things you enjoy and then going from there is really important. And then you can use that as evidence in your interviews.
Exactly.
Um,
You don't even really need to have a job previously. Anybody who's been in education will have a transferable skill. So even when you're just revising, that's the transferable skills that you're organized and things like that. So I think people are scared to kind of list skills because you think that that comes from experience in a job. You learn skills from anywhere. You learn skills from education. You learn skills at home, having friends. Like there's skills everywhere that you can learn along the way that would help you in any role. I can guarantee you now the role that we're all doing, we didn't have any previous skills or experience in that, but we definitely had transferable skills that made it a little bit easier to figure out for us. And I always say that about university and education in the way that I thought, okay, like this is really going to equip me for the world of work. I'm ready. But it actually wasn't that. It was the stuff that I kind of learned from having conversations with people and meeting different people and from extracurricular clubs and things like that. That's what's really prepared me for the world of work. So I think skills is a funny thing to talk about.
yeah. Um, So for Caden, how long did it take for you to build confidence in this role, and what was it that made you like notice it in the first place?
I think that I still am not totally confident. It's kind of like what I was saying. It's not real. The thing that made me notice it is when I started recently getting into a more client-facing position where I had to go and kind of sell to people who I've never met before, and I have to represent Pollen well. I have to kind of be able to pitch and speak to people, and this is not something I'd ever done. And I used to be like have terrible stage fright, afraid to speak in front of anybody. I was very shy, and I had people externally tell me that they just perceived me as confident, and then that made me feel confident. But I was also like, that's crazy because I actually completely blacked out during our conversation and don't remember a single thing that we talked about. And I think that I stumbled over my words and have no idea what was going on. So my perception of the interaction was totally different than their perception. And I think that that really helped because, again, we're always our own worst critics. It's a lot easier to look at what something you've done and think, like, I still think back and say, oh, I remember that time I spelled that thing wrong in an email like 6 months ago. Whereas no one else is paying attention. There's this thing called the imaginary audience theory, which is basically you think that everybody else is judging you and like criticizing you and thinking so negatively of you, when really no one else cares. And if you just put on like a disguise and just pretend like I'm this super confident person, it helps a lot. I don't know if anyone has seen Euphoria, but there's a scene in Euphoria where Maddie, this really stuck with me, where she talks about how 90% of life is confidence, and no one knows that confidence is real except for you. And I really think that that's kind of a good way to look at it, is it's truly just all a mindset, and it only comes with just pretending that you can do it.
Holly, there's a question for you in the chat, asking, I think it's regarding, you said you were talking about your 2023 self. Um,
In a startup, that's like 5 years ago.
so,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so I graduated in 2023. I was quite fortunate in a way that I was talking and I'm friends with a lot of people who are older than me. So with other people in my year, I was actually applying for roles a lot sooner. So I was applying for roles and looking at graduate schemes in about October when I kind of finished in like March, April time. So I was like on it because I was kind of given the heads up that like the job market isn't great right now. So I was kind of prepared for it and I made an extra effort to get work experience. So I did like an internship with an online publication. I did that and I was constantly like badgering my career services because I kind of knew how hard it was. And yeah, I was just kind of applying for jobs as soon as I was ready, even before I got my results. And then I stumbled across Pollen. I had my interview for Pollen. And Sophie was like, "Why did you apply?" And I was like, "Because I'm literally like your target audience. Like I'm struggling right now. It's hard out here. I don't know what to do. If I don't get this job, can you help me?" And then I kind of ended up in Pollen and I was able to look at the matchmaking process that we have now and basically go into it and make everything that I hated about looking for a job the opposite with Pollen, which has been really nice. So yeah, it is my first job out of university and it was a quick turnaround compared to what a lot of people are going through. I still have friends in my year that are struggling to get a job when we graduated in 2023. So I'm very fortunate, but I do always think, obviously, that other experience, I was in the final stage, but I think that was a pyramid scheme. I always do think how long it would take for me to get a job if Sophie didn't drop the CV and she didn't put trust in somebody who had, all I had was a 2 week work experience under my plate. But I had a passion and I had a drive. So.
See, because I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think what she wants to like see is if you could almost demo how you entered that tell me about yourself with you've just come out of uni, very minimal experience. How did you go about answering that question?
I literally went into it in a way that was I was at the point, obviously, she's very welcoming from the start. That I've packed it. I had a little notepad and I had all of my notes down. And I just did a lot of research about the company. And I said that I was like, I've just graduated university. I'm looking for my start in the world. To be honest, I like want to go into marketing. It's something I'm interested in. But then a lot of it was about how I related to the company and why I believe in Polly's mission and how I feel I can contribute to that. And that's kind of, I remember my interview with Sophie. It was very much a conversation. I think I was kind of at the point where it was like, I'm just gonna have chats with these people. But I understand that that again takes a lot of confidence to build and things like that. But I kind of entered it in a position of explaining that I am coming at it with a lack of experience, but I do have the enthusiasm and the belief for the role. And I made sure to highlight how I could do that. So I also did research. So when I was talking about it, I said, "Oh, I've seen these other companies that do the same kind of thing. Maybe we could do this." So I came with an idea, and from that, it kind of evolved.
Nice. It's interesting because you mentioned enthusiasm. So Rebecca's asked me to tell her what I said. And I think for me, it's important that you take into account the role that you've applied for. So I knew the job description of this role, like partnerships assistant, and a lot of it was like liaising with other people in the community. And at that point, it also meant other kind of companies that we could be working with and whatever. And so when I answered that question, I I made sure to mention parts about myself that kind of applied to that, but also showed my personality because I know the next question is, why did you apply for this role? In which case now I can start bringing in, yeah, I've got this degree and I've got this experience. That's fine. But I knew that a question about myself was, I enjoy, taking walks and I enjoy reading and I enjoy, I don't know, like just speaking about yourself and kind of, I don't know, building a personal bond with the person you're speaking with, because that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the interview, if that makes sense. I don't know, Caden, if you
It's
did
funny
something.
actually because I actually interviewed
Yeah,
Tam.
really into me.
I actually interviewed Tamika, and I have to say, like from our first conversation, when the kind of tell me about yourself question came up, I think we started the interview and we had to keep going back to the actual interview because Tam was so invested in what we do. And we were talking about the issues, and she was really forthcoming with her experience and why she really believes in that product or what we do. And the one thing that I will say is I know we're coming out of this as a pollen perspective and why we put ourselves across, but any company has something that they're passionate about. It doesn't have to be a charity, it doesn't have to be an NGO, it doesn't have to be anything like that. Just look at their values, look what's important to them, and say that's why you're applying because that's important to you too. And that's really what stuck out with both Caden and Tam so much that we hired them both.
Yeah, and that I feel like that lends itself to what I think I mentioned earlier. Like if you show that enthusiasm, I know Poppy's just asked what we actually looked for, which we'll touch on in a minute. If you actually show that enthusiasm, people will make space for you because they want someone like that on their team. And I think that's a really important thing to mention. But yeah, when researching the company for an interview, what things should you be looking for? I don't know if you've
I
reviewed.
can touch on this quickly and then I have to go because I actually have an interview at 12. So, but one thing that I think it's just really hard because you don't really know what you know until you try. And entry level is so daunting because you don't know what you want to do, probably. You don't know what kind of company you want to work for. I think it's just as helpful to figure out what you don't like. So even if you're like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I don't want to work for a big company, that is helpful. And looking at a company value, like their values on their website and everything is obviously very useful. And you have to go, like Holly said, you have to go on the company website before you go into an interview. But I would also recommend looking up people who work for that company on LinkedIn and kind of seeing things that they have to say. I think it's very impressive if you're able to be on an interview and say, hey, like I saw that you did XYZ last week or something. I remember when I was going through my interview process for different companies, I would often ask in the interview, what made the person interviewing me want to stay at the company. Because it's a two-way street. We say this every time, as much as it is like you're trying to prove yourself to the company, they also have to prove that they're the right place for you to work. Like Holly had that decision where she pulled out of a company because of the red flags. You need to try to draw those out too. So you need to ask questions that aren't just questions to try to be impressive, but things that you actually want to know about the business. So don't ask about like things just because you think that that's what they want to hear. Again, reach out to them in a way where you're genuinely interested in their experience. Because if you show that you want to know how they like the company, then they'll be able to tell you and give you insight that you probably wouldn't get otherwise on like the website or something. But yeah, that's what I'll say. And I also have to go. But
All right. Thank you, Caden.
I,
Bye-bye.
I I do think that's actually really interesting. Maybe we could quickly touch on this, Tam, is about questions after an interview. Not only do you need to research the company, I would just show um how like involved you are within the process by asking those questions. So when somebody goes like, "Do you have any questions?" I would refrain from just saying like no, or like the typical questions of, "Can you tell us about the like the next steps?" Because we will. Like once the kind of we've finished the conversation, we will tell you about next steps, or the person you're talking to will eventually tell you the next steps. Take that time to ask them questions that are really specific about, like Caden said, like seeing if you want to do the role and if it's something that you would enjoy. And we love it when questions put us on the spot. Like we love it when we look at each other and go, "Oh, okay, who's gonna answer that?" Because
Yeah.
then that makes the interview different and we remember that.
It's interesting because it's fun. Yeah, it's really interesting because I spoke to someone last week and he had questions where it's like, I said to him, I can't answer this because this is for the company,
Yeah.
but the company are going to love these questions. And it turns out yesterday he spoke with the company and they literally liked him so much that while he wasn't a good fit for that specific role, they're having chats to get him into a role in general. So again, I feel like we're just putting up anecdotes out of nowhere that actually show that asking questions and showing enthusiasm is probably number one, and will set you apart. I know you asked as well when like what things you should be looking for. If you're on a website, anything to do with like culture or their purpose, again, not every company is going to be a charity or for impact, but most websites will have something, even if it's like a buzzword like people first or like something that shows that that is what they're passionate about and that's their approach to how they run their business. You want to kind of make sure that your answers, I mean, it's for you as well. Do I want to work for somewhere where their purpose is XYZ? If it's not, then that it's a filtering system, I suppose. So yeah, I hope that helped. It is 12 now, so I'm gonna wrap up. But thank you, Holly, for joining me and to Caden, who's already left.
For hosting.
I'm going to put in a post-session survey. If you guys could please complete it before you leave, that would be really appreciated. And again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. And I mean, I'm going to plug the mental directory because again, a lot of the questions or a lot of the worries and concerns that you